Well, hello and welcome. We are doing a 5-part series as we work our way through Lent called Big God Questions. And I am here each week with someone new to talk about a big God question. Today I'm here with Miss Kelly Winters and her youngest daughter, Eliza. And Kelly, could you just kind of introduce yourself and say a little bit about how you got connected here at Grace Lutheran Church?
All right. Well, I've been a member here, my husband and I, since 2010. And we started here actually when I started working here as the administrative assistant. And then we decided we liked the church, so we became members. And we're pretty active at the beginning and all through until our daughters are born. Now we're maybe not as active, but we still are very happy to be part of the Grace community and enjoy being here.
Well, we're very happy to have you. It's wonderful to have Eliza with us too. I've got 2 little girls who are just about 3 months older than Eliza at home, so it's always fun to see some kids grow up together and have some fun playing around. But as we kind of get started here, we are tackling a different question every week. And so our very first question up is a pretty good one. It's who is Jesus? And that's a pretty big
Yeah.
question. That's the whole point, big God questions.
Yeah.
We start with a big question. So I think it's often easier, rather than to tackle the one main question directly, is to kind of work our way around it, and maybe some smaller questions that will help us flesh out a little bit of that idea of who is Jesus? How do we even talk about that? What does that mean? So what I was thinking, the first thing that came up in my mind when I heard that question, who is Jesus, is more about this kind of idea or even dichotomy of when we're talking about God, do we talk about just Jesus or are we talking about God? Is one of those two concepts easier or harder to talk about? And so I was wondering maybe what you thought about that. Do you think it's easier to talk about Jesus or is it easier just to talk about God?
Well, the first time you told me that we were going to talk about this question, I was a little nervous because I do think I get a little hesitant about talking about Jesus. I find it easier to talk about God. I think maybe because sometimes Jesus and some of the words related to him have become almost like buzzwords in our society, like salvation and savior, and even the cross has been related more to like movements like Jesus freak and what would Jesus do and all these things that kind of lean more towards fundamentalist Christians. And so sometimes that's hard for me to bring up a conversation about Jesus because I worry that other people are going to put me in that like kind of more conservative Christian role. I'm gonna shy back and be like afraid to talk about it. Where God seems to be more of a universal topic that you can talk about without like showing yourself as being like, oh, I'm one of those Christians that a lot of times are shown in a bad light in our society today.
No, absolutely. I think we all have this, especially if we're active in church, and even me as a pastor, I have this kind of fear of if I'm going to start a conversation with someone, is it going to be like I'm knocking on their door and saying, oh, have you found Jesus? Because we've all kind of had that experience probably with somebody knocking on our door, and it's not usually a good one. And I don't want to be associated with that particular kind of group or somebody who just wants to, quote unquote, save somebody without ever getting to know them. I think you're right. I think oftentimes it is easier to talk about God because it's more abstract. It can be maybe even more inclusive depending on how well you know somebody. And I think that kind of relates in a way because when we're talking about these things, it's, I think, a pretty intimate conversation. Maybe some of the tension when this happens out in public is you're asking about very personal things to someone you know almost nothing about, and that doesn't feel genuine at all. And so when we're talking about God, we're talking about Jesus, there's something kind of personal about it. Not that the relationship has to be completely personal, but what we think about God and about Jesus and some of these really big questions, those are, I think, really personal, deep at the heart of who we are kind of questions.
Yeah, and it's like that line of like, you don't, especially nowadays, it feels like so like the PC, like do you have to like, what line do you meet that you want to be able to talk openly about your faith and your beliefs, but not like offend somebody else, but then it's part about just sharing and listening, and you want to be able to talk about Jesus in a way that you want other people to talk about what God and Jesus mean to them. And like I personally am not trying to put any judgment on anybody else, so but how do you approach that topic of like,
Yeah, no,
showing
I
that
think
you're
that's
open.
that's the heart of the issue here, how difficult that is. And for me, I think one way of trying to bridge that gap is not to necessarily just dive in and say, who is Jesus to you, or have you found Jesus? What's your relationship with Jesus? But to try and use some kind of story to tie it in. And so even that question of like, do you have a story of Jesus that you know or that you tell to your kids or something that's your favorite? And I could probably answer that a number of different ways, but I'm wondering if you and your husband Jonathan are raising your kids, are there any stories that you tend to tell to your kids, or any favorite Bible story that kind of comes up?
Well, the ones that are my favorite that are related to Jesus aren't necessarily the ones that I tell Bernadette yet as
Sure.
story. I mean, like, she does really like to hear like the stories of Jesus bringing like Jesus and the children. Like, we have books like that have that, or she likes Noah's Ark and some of those kind of ones that involve animals. Like, at her age, that's kind of
It works, yeah.
It's kind of the way
yeah.
to meet her at her level. But me personally, the stories that I enjoy are the ones that are like really Jesus's true teachings, are like what I feel like are his overarching teachings, like when he talks about the new commandment, about loving each other, and when he's talking about not judging others and to forgive others, and you will be forgiven, and things like that. I think those are like the ones that are a little harder, I think, for like kids.
Yeah, it takes some
get
time,
there,
especially our kids are so young, they're
yeah.
just kind of understanding the concept of a story.
Yeah.
So no, that makes a lot of sense.
Right now, Bernadette loves the stained glass window that's over here.
Oh, yeah, right outside.
That has
yeah.
the squirrel, because she'll be like, "That's Jesus, and that's a squirrel." So to her, like,
Perfect.
Jesus
Yeah.
likes squirrels, and that's fine.
Yeah, I love it. That's
that
great.
can like be a good way to approach her. That like, yes, Jesus loves animals too.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned stained glass, because something I really love doing, and I do it every week, is on Monday I teach a chapel lesson to the preschoolers. And we're always, it's okay, Eliza.
All right.
Yeah. But we're always either in the chapel or in the sanctuary, and the kids just love looking at all of these gorgeous stained glass windows up above them. So a couple of times I've just basically stopped whatever I was trying to teach and say, who do you see in that picture? What do you think is happening? And their imaginations go wild, and I love just getting their interpretation, because all of those stained glass windows, no matter where you go in the church, they're all telling a story. And I think the kids pick that up even before we do. It's really a lot of fun to see.
Yeah, and I love it when you get to that, the preschool age especially, and you ask a kid a question, especially when you're in a church, and their answer, when they say Jesus, it's like no matter what the question is.
Yeah,
It's
there's
like,
the
I've been
classic
trained.
example, like
I've been
if you're in
trained
a
to say
children's sermon, you're like, and I looked out my window and there was someone there at the bird feeder eating all of the bird food. Who do you think it was? And they all say, Jesus.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, it was a squirrel, but okay, sure.
That's the answer to everything, right? Yeah.
The next question I had was, I think we've touched on it a little bit. Do you think Jesus has a reputation in the world today? What do you, if someone's talking about Jesus, what do you think the reputation of Jesus is?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you hit on that somewhat. I think that to some people it can be like it's too much of the patriarch or something like that. That maybe like that's what they relate to. I mean, my hope would be that they would still think of Jesus as being hope and and love, and so that's when I talk to anybody. I mean, when I get to that level where you can have these conversations, I hope that that's what I project out to people. But I don't know if that's what general society is getting, and it is a little like upsetting that like that's what it like. But you want to be like, no, that's not what Jesus
That's
is
not
really
really
about.
who Jesus is.
It's not just about being this guy that's telling you what to do and what not to do. Like.
Yeah, and I think I'm on track with you there. And as I was thinking about that question a little bit, I think Christianity and followers of Jesus have a very different reputation than say Jesus.
Yeah.
I think, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but I think Jesus still has a pretty solid reputation. People seem to like at least the idea of Jesus, or what Jesus might stand for, or the kind of teachings that Jesus had. But then the reputation for the people following Jesus, Christians, maybe is a little different,
Yeah.
especially when you start talking in some of the more fundamental circles. A lot of people, their only experience they might have with a Christian is the person knocking on their door saying, "Have you found Jesus? Take my pamphlet." And that's probably not the best introduction. And I think there was even like a quote by, I don't remember who it was, maybe it was Gandhi at some point, that said, I very much like your Christ, but I don't like your Christians. And so I wish your Christians could be more like your Christ. And I always thought that was a really good call of like, not just to say what would Jesus do, but how do we approach the world the way Jesus approached the world.
Yeah. I would hope that we do our best to like embody some of those teachings of love and peace and joy and all those that are should be the cornerstones.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it's especially tricky because if you don't have any kind of a huge background in either a church or in the stories of Jesus, well, you might just hear one person's interpretation and you think, well, that's all there is to it, and I didn't like that so much, so I don't want to go there, but. There's so many layers to the story, and there's so many different ways to look at the very same words on a page that I think it's bigger than any person in a lifetime can even dive into. And we certainly, as a society in general, aren't devoting lifetimes of study into looking at Jesus. One last question to kind of wrap up our little conversation around who is Jesus today. And so that is, it's a simple one. If you could meet Jesus and ask one question, what would you ask Jesus?
Well, I mean, there's probably like a million different questions, but the first one that popped in my head was probably the silliest one, is that I just always wondered what was Jesus up to during that time we don't know about. Like the time, I mean, we kind of end off when he's a child in the temple and then start up again when he's like 30 and getting followers. And
nothing in between, right?
There's theories of all these different things, and I'm sure it's even just something silly like I was being a carpenter. But like,
I've always heard that Jesus was just a really awkward teenager, so they didn't write down any of those stories, right?
Yeah, and so I just am curious of like if to meet Jesus, to be like, I just want to know what were you up to, for 10, 12 years of your life that we don't know about, because he's such a prominent figure that it seems like we're just.
You should have all of it, right? Yeah. Where's the Wikipedia entry for those years, right?
Where's all that?
I was kind of imagining, and I've wondered this a few times and around in different ways, is that the way we talk about Jesus, especially with Jesus is God and God is Jesus and God is the Holy Spirit. There's a weird Trinity thing that I don't think makes sense to anybody, but if it makes sense to somebody, good for them. But then this idea, if Jesus is God, then can Jesus kind of learn something new? If Jesus is supposed to be like omnipotent or knowing everything, my basic question then would boil down to, as Jesus was kind of living his life and going through all these things and picking up the disciples, did he really know where it was all going, where it was all going to end, or did he learn or was surprised by something along the way? I always like to imagine Jesus being surprised in some of these stories, like if he's talking to, say, the woman at the well who was kind of an outsider, and then she asks him for a blessing or to be healed. I just imagine him being like surprised, like, oh, this person too is a part of this plan that God has sent me on, and so that would be kind of my question. What surprised you on your journey? And I don't know. I'd be interested to see.
Yeah, like did he know everything that was going to happen, or did he just have the wisdom in the moment to know how to deal with all the situations?
Yeah, and I think those things are different. And I remember I was a philosophy major in college, so we would get into very semantic debates about things like this. And so someone kind of said, well, if Jesus is perfect, then he couldn't really learn anything new, because if you were in the state of not knowing something, then you're less perfect. So Jesus must have known everything the whole time. And I like to argue that maybe perfection includes learning new things along the way.
Yeah, and the fact that think about that Jesus was your age at one point.
Yeah.
Like, do you think that he just knew everything as a
that would be kind of weird,
baby?
right?
Or did that knowledge come as his human part was
grew into the knowledge of who he was too. Yeah, and it's interesting because there's even kind of traditions that date back. If you look at icons of Jesus, which are paintings done of Jesus, especially in the kind of Eastern Orthodox tradition, when Jesus is a baby, they paint Jesus as a baby but with like an adult's face. And it's very unsettling to look at.
creepy.
It's creepy. I'll just throw it out there. It's creepy.
Yeah.
But the point behind it was, well, Jesus was God and was perfect and would have known all of these things, so it wouldn't make sense for Jesus to look like a child who doesn't know and understand things. So that's why they painted Jesus that way, because they were trying to make a theological argument there. And I still think it's creepy, and I think you could learn and be perfect too.
Yeah.
But that's the direction they went with it. So people have been thinking about that for a really long time and trying to figure out, exactly who is Jesus, how does that work, and I don't know that we're going to get any answers, but I think that the conversation is the important part and the journey of trying to figure it out. So I don't know if that's helpful or not. Probably not, but
I think there's just a little bit. That's the point of faith, right? It's just to kind of.
It comes down to that.
It can't be 100% known, or else there'd be no point in having faith.
Then it's just it's a whole nother thing. If it just makes sense and it's known, it's not faith anymore. But very good. Well, I do want to thank you for sitting down with me, being brave enough to be the first one up, talk about Jesus in front of thousands and thousands of people that I'm sure will join us online.
Sure.
But no, this is just the first conversation, and my hope is that those of you who may be watching this video, however you got this link, that you will be thinking about some of these things and maybe even leave a comment. There's a little bar at the very bottom of this webpage. You can add in your own comment about what you think. Who do you think Jesus is? Is there one of those questions that resonated with you, something you'd like us to discuss in a future week? We'd be happy to check that out. But you can leave a comment below. And also, very soon, if not already, there should be another video linked right below this one. And that is a little sermon or a message from Dr. Leland Albright touching on this very same topic, the who is Jesus. Every week, he's doing a message on Wednesday morning, and then by Wednesday afternoon, this video and his video should be up and available for you to check out and have just another point of view, another idea about whatever the big God question is. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Miss Eliza, for being here.
Yeah.
And we hope we'll see you again next week. Take care.